Donald Trump has had a difficult time accepting the fact that he has lost his reelection bid. And he did not attend Joe Biden's inauguration. We kind of expected that. I don't know why everyone in the media seems to be losing their mind about it. I would prefer that he just not be there. I think it's actually a blessing that he's not there. But nonetheless, he did decide to leave the White House this morning by boarding Marine One. He had like a small group of people there to kind of cheer him on. He did speak to some reporters. He did not, engage in the typical traditional ceremonial events centered on the inauguration of the incoming president. Because again, he's bitter. He's angry about the fact that he lost. He's angry about the fact that possibly for the first time in his life, he wasn't able to exploit some sort of loophole or muscle his way into getting what he wants. And he can't stand that. So he did give a self-congratulatory speech, which we'll get to in just a second. But John, what are your thoughts about his unwillingness to attend the inauguration? Like, do you even really care?
Well, I've gotten the pretty strong signal that you don't, so I'm gonna pretend that I don't too, because I want domestic tranquility. No, look, I almost brought up in our first hour of coverage this morning, like hypothetically, this is sort of a hypocrisy check or whatever. If he had been there, what would we say? Because I doubt what we'd be saying is good. Yay, awesome, okay, good, he's being responsible, we move on. We probably wouldn't be saying that. But that said, I think that in theory, some of the peaceful transfer of power norms could be good. I think that it's, undisputable that if he were there, that would potentially get some of his followers to marginally accept the credibility of the election a little bit more. Him fleeing is another signal to them that it doesn't count, that Biden's illegitimate and all of that. I'm not saying they'd love him or anything, but they've always done it. We've done it for 150 years and he wasn't there. I don't care, I'm not losing sleep over it. I'm just saying, I think if I could press a button and have had him there, quiet, not making any, like drawing any attention to himself, I would have preferred that probably.
I mean, he's not, I don't think he's capable of that. And he would suck all the energy out of the whole event with his antics. Like Trump is Trump, like that's what Trump does. I don't think it matters. I think that his supporters are always going to interpret things in whatever way they want to interpret it. So if Trump gives some sort of address or releases some sort of statement discouraging violence, they'll go ahead and read that as, oh, he doesn't really mean it. He was pressured or forced into doing this. If he had gone to the inauguration and said unequivocally that Joe Biden was the fair winner of the election, his supporters would still go along with this ridiculous deception about the election and how it was stolen from Trump. Like that, like at some point there, you have to acknowledge that there are some people who aren't interested in having a reasonable discussion about anything and will. They'll be fluid with whatever conspiracy theory they have so it can adapt to the situation on the ground. Like we've seen that happen so many times where QAnon's ideology will like morph into something different depending on what the current events are in any given moment. But who knows? I mean, we're both kind of speculating here, but I would bet money that it would change nothing. And if anything, Trump being there would be a giant distraction. So he gets on Marine One. He wanted to make sure that he flew to Florida while still the president of the United States. That was really important to him. And he did give a speech before leaving. So let's hear a little bit of what he had to say.
We also got tax cuts, the largest tax cut and reform in the history of our country by far. I hope they don't raise your taxes. But if they do, I told you so. And if you look at the regulations, which I consider the regulation cuts to be maybe even more important, that's why we have such good and have had such good job numbers. The job numbers have been absolutely incredible. When we started, had we not been hit by the pandemic, we would have had numbers that would never have been seen. Already our numbers are the best ever. If you look at what happened until February a year ago, our numbers were at a level that nobody had ever seen before.
There are plenty of Americans living in poverty now. Plenty of Americans who are experiencing poverty for the first time in their lives right now because of Donald Trump's incompetence and unwillingness to lead, because of his self-dealing, because of his narcissism and self-interests. All he did was cut taxes for the wealthy. All he did was ensure that interest rates remain low so corporations can benefit from it. And he loves to talk about the stock market. The stock market is not a good indicator of what the real economy is actually experiencing. And when you have 8 million Americans who are in poverty now, like who weren't in poverty and started experiencing first-time poverty, like poverty for the first time since the last summer. That was an incredibly inarticulate way of saying it, but you get what I'm saying. 8 million more Americans fell into poverty since the last summer. That's a better way of putting it. So to argue that like, oh, it's the best economy in the world. No, it's been a disastrous economy. And of course, part of that is COVID. But COVID was compounded by his unwillingness to do what it took in the short term to ensure that people were safe. I mean, he's the one who discouraged people from wearing masks. He's the one who discouraged social distancing. He's the one who admitted on tape that he was intentionally downplaying this severe virus. He was a complete and utter disaster. And to give a speech, a self-congratulatory speech, as 400,000 Americans are dead from coronavirus. It just shows you how shameless this guy is.
Are you implying that he didn't do enough just because he did absolutely nothing? Yeah, no. Like we created so many jobs. He's leaving with 3 million less jobs than America had when he became president. Okay, you're right. The stock market is not the economy, but let's pretend that it is. He did worse in that by far than Clinton, Obama, and Reagan. He did better than George W. and George W.'s dad. That's it. He didn't even do great in that. And he'll say, well, yeah, up until last February. Okay, but as Anna pointed out, you could have recovered quite a bit since last February. You made a bunch of conscious decisions that caused that not to happen. They didn't just hurt job growth and the stock market. They also killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. And even if that weren't the case, like nothing happened under the previous presidencies that like artificially impacted things. It's like someone in the chat said, like I had the best relationship ever until last February when she cheated on me with a bartender. Well, no, that counts. You don't get to say before the bartender. You gotta count the bartender, Trump.
Yeah. And what always frustrates me is when you look at his presidency as a whole, in every single area, he failed. He deserves no credit. And for people who love to use the phrase Trump derangement syndrome, because they like to immediately deflect and talk about the failures of Democrats, which by the way, there are many, right? And I think it's fair to bring up the failures of Democrats. But when you use that as a strategy to deflect from the issues that we've experienced under the Trump administration, we have a problem. Because show me a policy that, let's say, Obama engaged in where Trump somehow was better, because Trump wasn't better in any way. Trump took neoliberal policy and injected it with steroids. That's who Trump is. When it comes to foreign policy, failure. I see some leftists on Twitter today talking about like, well, he didn't engage in any new wars. I mean, not without trying, guys, and I think you know that. Ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, implemented additional sanctions on Iran, including during the pandemic to prevent humanitarian aid from getting to the country. Started 2020 by assassinating their top general, which of course is an escalation, which could have led to a full-blown war. I'm lucky, and we're all lucky that we didn't get to that point. But that's just Iran. Consider the fact that our government, our Congress, which typically loves to engage in forever wars, actually passed a bipartisan bill to pull the United States out of involvement in Yemen. And you know what Trump did with that? He ripped it up. Maybe mention that. Maybe mention that when you give him credit for not starting any new wars. Enabled Israel to further persecute Palestinians through a number of different things that he engaged in. like naming Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He knew how provocative that would be. He did it anyway. He doesn't care. The list goes on and on. Record weapon sales to Asian countries like Japan to further destabilize that region because he doesn't like China and wants to beat the war drums against China, something that Steve Bannon has been pretty encouraging on as well. I mean, again, list goes on and on. If you have issues with neoliberal policies, which you should, at least acknowledge the fact that Trump took those policies and not only implemented them himself, but put them on steroids. Record tax cuts for corporations, record tax cuts for the wealthy, did not cut corporate tax loopholes, they still exist. Record stock buybacks under his watch. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on.
It did, for 4 years it went on and on.
For 4 years, but hey, you know what? Trump derangement syndrome. That's what we're engaging in, Trump derangement syndrome.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.